49ers preseason action, week 2 against the Denver Broncos, and it's the first game at Levi Stadium in a while. Should be a fun one, and I've got here Larry Krueger with me to break it all down. We're back after this.
Let's go get him. Let's go get him today, man. Let's go. Hey, double down, 3, 1, 2, 3, double down.
Welcome back to the channel, everybody. It's been a fun week, and now we've got some preseason action coming up tomorrow. But before that, I have to give an introduction to the one and only Larry Krueger. Larry, how you doing, my man?
Rohan, man, doing great. Great to be here.
And glad to have you on again. It's been an interesting offseason nonetheless. We've had a lot of quarterback talk. That's just par for the course with the San Francisco 49ers. But there's also a lot of other storylines that have gone on with this team. And now, as we get into the breadth of the preseason, excited to hear what you have to say on the overall portion of the offseason and kind of what we have to look forward to going forward.
Yeah, there's no shortage of topics, that's for sure.
Yeah. Before we get to the main topic, which is week 2, wanted to ask you just quickly, what were some takeaways that you had of week 1 of the preseason, things that were just on your mind as you headed into this week of practices?
Well, the Niners got knocked around. 49er fans are not used to seeing that. But I would say that, before people lose their mind, you just remember that, the 49ers, they don't have a lot of depth on either side of the line of scrimmage. And it's a big deal on defense because those guys play. On offense, it's only a big deal if you have injuries. I kind of like the 49ers first-team offensive line, Trent Williams, Aaron Banks, Jake Brendel, Spencer Burford, Colton McKivitz, but we didn't see any of them. And so I think there was a lot of people came out of that game like, oh, the Niners have major O-line problems. Well, yeah, they have major O-line problems if all 5 of their starters go down. But show me a team in the league that doesn't. So, right. There was that. Then, I thought Sam Darnold looked really good. In a very short amount of time, I wanted to see him out there more. But they took him off the field. And then there was just guys that kind of shined individually. And to me, I don't care about the results of preseason. I just care about coming off the field healthy. They did that. And having a number of guys kind of flash and show you that they can contribute. And Jalen Graham, D. Winters, there were a number of guys really across the board that flashed. Jair Brown. There were some good things. There was definitely some good things that came out in that game. Quantrez Knight, I thought, played pretty well. So there were, Ronnie Bell. There were some guys who showed some bright spots. So to me, it's more about what you really care about is injuries. They didn't suffer a bunch of injuries, and that's really the primary.
Right. And again, sometimes for fans, it's hard to take away good things when you lose 34-7 in any game, regardless of if preseason, regular season. But there was some good that came out of it. As to your first point on the offensive line and the defensive line, I agree. The offensive line, right? If you look around the league, it's not just the 49ers. There's a scarcity at the entirety of the position. It's tough to see it. First of all, it's tough to roster 5 real solid offensive linemen from left to right. Add on depth, and it's tough, especially given the given the way that you normally have a salary cap where you can't allot as much money to the backups. It's tough to allot a certain amount of money to where you can have a true competent offensive line with their backups, especially when you have a team like the 49ers that is top heavy and has a ton of, strong players at the top of their roster. And that obviously they get a lot of money out of that.
Yeah, and it's just, if you had 3/5 of your offensive line, you could sit there and go, well, they weren't all in there. But no, in this case, none of them played.
Right.
And, Matt Pryor, I don't think is all that great. Keith Ishmael, I don't think is all that great. Nick Zakelj struggled. badly. I thought Jalen Moore struggled. They could have offensive line issues if they have 2 or 3 key injuries this year. But I think you could probably say that for a lot of teams in the sport. But if there's one thing that jumped out, it's that even though they've got some, a number of offensive linemen in this camp, when you really look closely, I say that they really only have 7 good offensive linemen, and they're probably going to have to trade for that 8th. And like if camp broke today and they were cutting the thing down to 53, I would make John Feliciano and Ilm Manning my 2 backup offensive linemen, and then I think I would wind up trading something, probably a 2024 pick for a swing tackle, or signing one, or picking one up if somebody cut one loose that I liked. But they just worked out 3 guys the other day. I expect there'll be, 5 or 6 more candidates that they look at between now and the cut down, and they may, they may make a deal. They may, grab somebody that gets cut by another team. If you said to me, is the Niners swing tackle on their roster now or on somebody else's roster, I would say somebody else's roster.
And that is a great point, because coming into this offseason, what I wanted to see in training camp, a lot of people said Colton Lekivitz, I think we might have a problem there. In my honest opinion, I thought the biggest issue on this team overall was not the starting right tackle. It was the swing tackle position, because San Francisco didn't allot many resources into trying to find, a solid option once Brunskill left, once McKivitz obviously upgraded from your swing tackle to your starter. You didn't really allot many resources. Matt Pryor, I personally was not a fan of what I saw during camp and during the preseason. You have Jalen Moore, who has struggled to play at tackle. Seems, at least he projected better as a guard coming out of college, in my opinion, when I watched his film. Just never got that opportunity based on other injuries or however the 49ers roster ended up coming out. And then you've got Leroy Watson, who's a developmental, talent there. You could see something there, but it might take some time. And I don't know if the 49ers are willing to, risk potentially having him play this season. Just because he's there, he could be a good developmental piece going forward. Ilm Manning, though, is an interesting candidate. The one thing about him, though, is does he slot in at tackle given his size and his arm length of 32 inches? He probably suits better for a guard. That brings up the question of, do the 49ers go for a swing tackle elsewhere? And if so, why didn't they potentially choose to do so a little earlier and try and, have that guy in the building, have that guy learn the offense type of thing? And so that might be one of my critiques of the 49ers this offseason, specifically with their handling of that position.
I think it's fair. I think that's a fair critique. I mean, Dawan Jones was there. I mean, he's clearly a much better option than the guys they currently have. What I see is that Pryor, to me, looks a little heavy-footed and a little out of shape. Jalen Moore lacks the urgency to play tackle and to be out on the island against great rushers. Leroy Watson's world's better than where he was, but he's nowhere near good enough. Gutierrez is not NFL, not as a starting tackle. So Ilm Manning really does look good. I mean, I wouldn't be afraid to put Ilm Manning out there at left tackle. He's got a quick kick step. He's got quick feet, plays with a strong base. You're right, though. He's got 32-inch arms, which means, that changes the geometry. You for these edge rushers, the arm length is crucial. So I like Ilm because he can play left tackle, but I don't like him as the backup left tackle. The team that I've been mentioning to a number of people that I'd be on the lookout for at the cut down, and this is, who knows? I haven't canvassed the entire league or anything, and I don't want to make people think that I have. But if you look at Cincinnati's got Big Zeus Brown, who they signed from Kansas City. He's at left tackle. And they moved Jonah Williams from left tackle to right tackle. They also have Jackson Carman, who was a second-round pick out of Clemson, in their tackle room. And then they also have Akeem Adeniji, who's a huge offensive lineman who they like. And then they also have Lael Collins, who's on the PUP list. And right. Lael Collins, once upon a time was a very good player at LSU. I also really like Deontay Smith, who was a 4th-round pick in the 2021 draft. He's 6'5", 310. He's got the build of an offensive tackle. To me, I'd like to have one of those two guys. I'd like to have Deontay Smith or Lael Collins, and I'd even be willing to move a day 3 pick in 2024 if I could get Cincinnati to part with those guys before the cut down.
And I mean, there are a couple of options there. And again, you're looking at the teams where you might have a little more depth compared to others. The guy who I had been really highlighting throughout the entirety of the offseason up until 3 weeks ago when he signed was George Fant. Not necessarily the best player overall, but in terms of swing tackle, the reason that I thought I gravitated more towards him than other options, one, he played for the New York Jets, has experience in that offensive system that Mike LaFleur ran for the last few years over there in New York. He's also going to Houston, which is the same offensive system that Kyle Shanahan ran when he signed 3 weeks ago. I think the upgrade in terms of knowledge of the system, which for the 49ers, Chris Forster and that offensive line unit appeared to be pretty important. The $3 million investment that Fant got from the Houston Texans, I thought, that could be somewhere the 49ers could go. Obviously, they didn't. They've worked out a couple of guys. Ty Nsekhe was one of them, obviously a former Dallas Cowboys tackle there. There's a couple of options on the market, but I like I said earlier, think that this is a position that I felt they could have pounced on a little earlier in the offseason at not that big of a risk, especially considering they still have good amount of cap space left.
The other guy that I kind of like that, I think's got a lot of potential, but he hasn't come of age is Mekhi Becton in New York with the Jets, who was their first round pick in 2020, and he's had some knee injuries. But man, Becton's a house. I mean, he is just an absolute monster. He's 6'7", like 365 pounds. He's got nice feet. He's the kind of, high-end player that I would have interest in if his knee checked out.
I mean, that would be an interesting guy. One other guy that I'll point out that played in Houston last year, a younger player. Don't know if he'd be the perfect fit, but Forster does seem to do well with, developing players, at least over a period of time. George Little, the 25-year-old offensive tackle, played for the Texans last year. I believe, or sorry, not George Little, Greg Little, originally he's played, I believe, in Miami. He's played with Carolina. That's where he was drafted. He could be a potential intriguing developmental guy, although the 49ers might look for a guy who they know is proven, understanding where they are with their tackle situation with the swing tackles.
Don't sleep on Tom Compton either. I think Compton's still out there. Yeah. You could probably go get him. I mean, he started, playoff games for the Niners in the past. It's not an ideal guy by any stretch, but could be better than what they have.
No, definitely. Let's flip it over, though. We talked about offensive line. Not as worried, just given that depth overall in the NFL is scarce. Defensive line, though, on the other hand, the 49ers have normally been pretty strong with their depth at that unit. Did it surprise you that that unit struggled a little bit, apart from certain players? Cleveland Farrell, I thought, played well. Austin Bryant, I thought, played well. Did it concern you that the depth might not be as strong as fans might have perceived coming into this offseason?
Well, there's no question. And what I really didn't like more than anything was just how the Raiders ran it in the A-gap all day and all night against Javon Kinlaw and Kevin Givens and T.Y. McGill and Marlon Davidson. I mean, they're you think back the last few years, the Niners, whether it was DJ Jones, Contavious Street, they've always had some big bodies in the middle that could stop the run. I'm concerned about that. If you can't stop the run at the point, that's all you get. And Kinlaw cannot be trusted. Givens is a one-gap penetrator, pass rusher. I think the same thing could be said for Kalia Davis. McGill doesn't really have the heft. Marlon Davidson is a one-gap penetrating pass rusher. Wagy's a little underpowered. I mean, they just don't have that guy. So, yeah, I'd love to see them have, somebody on that interior outside of Armstead who could play the run in the A-gap. And I'm not seeing it right now.
I agree. And I think that this is another concern for me with the 49ers, and one that I didn't really expect to say going into this offseason. But to me, it seems the 49ers have too many similar players at defensive tackle. I don't mean similar players by build. You obviously have athletic freak in Javon Kinlaw. You've got different guys, but they it seems like they've materialized on this somewhat undersized defensive tackle that has great athleticism that matches well in the pass rushing game. Whereas that's great, but you also sacrifice a little bit in the run game. And I think with the way the 49ers like to rotate, that might hurt them. For me, going into this offseason, I wanted some 3-down defensive linemen because last year I thought that that's what hurt the 49ers at times, having, especially on the interior. And I think Javon Hargrave is a great signing for that. He's had a wonderful camp, especially as a pass rusher. But if you look at his tape overall, it's not like he's the strongest run defender either. He's an average or so run defender and an elite pass rusher to match with that. Armstead's on a different level. He's a great run defender and a solid pass rusher as well. But to me, it seems like the 49ers have gone through and gotten some of these guys who can really rush the passer. They feel can rush the passer, and sacrificed a little bit on the other side with some of these undersized guys, and then potentially a Kinlaw who they might have expected to step up a bit in a fully healthy season hasn't necessarily done that, at least in the limited reps we've seen so far.
I mean, they haven't replaced DJ Jones. I mean, DJ Jones has, losing him. I'm not saying they should have paid him, but he was a very stout run defender. You couldn't uproot him out of there, and they miss him now. Pass rush is at such a premium in today's NFL that they probably will be able to find somebody who's got strength at the point of attack to help them against the run. That will be involved in a cut down situation. But I'm going to be real interested to see how they pare this thing down. I mean, obviously you got Bosa and Drake and Armstead and Hargrave. You got Cleveland Farrell. Okay, that's 5. Givens is 6. Maybe Kerry Hyder, that's 7. You got Beal, that's 8. After that, it's like, is Taco Charlton make it? Maybe that's 9. Marlon Davidson, maybe that's 10. I don't know. It's just they haven't
It's
even
a lot
had
of names, yeah.
I mean, I'm just saying that, like, and then like Breeland Speaks to me doesn't look like he's in great shape. I see Spencer Wagee on the ground too much. Austin Bryant seems not very stout against the run. Kalia Davis has got a knee problem. Barrett's been on the practice squad the last couple of years. So, I mean, there's just like issues with all these guys. But I think you're going to see some new faces, to be honest. I think you both at defensive end, and they may even bring in a defensive tackle at the cut down. I mean, there was talk that Dallas may, cut Neville Gallimore. I'd have a lot of interest there. Dallas also has a ton of defensive ends. They can't keep them all. Dante Fowler could wind up cut. Tyrus Wheat, Junior Fajoko. All those guys would be of interest to me.
And one other thing, it's obviously premature, but I feel like this is going to be the year of the reload at the trade deadline. The 49ers have obviously gotten some of the riches of their group from the trade deadline. Jordan Willis in 2020, Charles Omenihu in 2021 for late round picks. Now that kind of group has departed, you're now, incorporating new guys and trying to weather the storm in this way. I think that that's going to definitely be on their mind, especially if this group kind of continues in a similar fashion with the way that we've seen so far.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point.
But offensive line, defensive line, we talked about that. Let's go overall, because Larry, for those of you that don't know, Larry was a huge guy for Brock Purdy last year. And I'll be honest, I was not in training camp. I didn't. I was not as high on Brock Purdy. I thought that the things that you could see on his college film were there, but I also thought he'd require some good development as a quarterback in the NFL. Larry saw it early. Obviously, we've seen how Brock Purdy is. Who are some of your standouts though this year that you've kind of that have piqued your interest that you think could make an impact that others might not see?
Well, I don't know. It's hard to know what other people are seeing, but I'll just give you a few that I like that, are not necessarily first, second round guys. I mean, the Niners didn't even have a first or second round pick, but Ronnie Bell, out of Michigan, I think is really impressive to me. His dad is a college wide receiver coach, and you can kind of see it in his new, in his, just how advanced he is. Most rookie receivers, gather to break, into their breaks, and they waste steps, and there's wasted movement. This guy doesn't have wasted movement. Catches the ball with his hands. He doesn't body catch it. He's just got a lot of things that I really, really like, and he's a very veteran-like player, despite the fact he's a rookie. So I expect him to play really, really well. I really like Ilm Manning, the offensive lineman. We've kind of already discussed him a little bit. There's a number of guys I really like across the board, but on the defensive side of the ball, in the secondary, Deshaun Jameson is a player that I guaranteed a month ago was going to make the team. I think he's a dynamic two-way player. I mean, I said it at the time. I think he's a good cover guy. He knows how to play. They've played him a little bit at the slot, a little bit outside, but he's also a dynamic return guy. And you saw that last week against the Raiders. And then as far as a guy that nobody's talking about that I think has a real shot to make the roster, I like Taylor Hawkins, number 41 on defense.
Yeah.
Taylor Hawkins, was a really good football player. Now, most of the reason that I see these guys faster than other people is just that I'm a huge college football fan. So I watch a lot of college ball. So, I loved Taylor Hawkins at San Diego State. He was on a really good defense, and he was a really solid player. Now, he was a corner at San Diego State. The Niners brought him in last year, and they tried him at safety because he doesn't have great 40 time for a corner. And he put on some bad weight, and he just wasn't moving the same. And they put him on the practice squad, and he learned all year. Well, this year, the first time I saw him in OTAs, I thought, wow, this guy's looking much more explosive, much faster. And now it's carried over into training camp, and he makes a lot of plays against the run. He's a really heady player, but he also can cover. So, on paper, he shouldn't make the team. I think they're going to have Hufanga and Gibson, George Odom, and Jair Brown. But if Odom, who's missed some time the last week with some injuries, if he, for whatever reason, is not healthy and has to start on the IR, man, Hawkins is nice. He's really playing fast. He's physical. He's smart. He can play coverage. There's a lot to like there.
And I really like the Hawkins selection. I was going to actually go with him. And I honestly thought his film this past week went down with it with my co-host. And I thought that film this past week was pretty darn solid. In a game where I thought when you look back at it, a lot of people were kind of timid. They linebackers especially, waited for the runners to come to them. They were running right through the A gap, but linebackers weren't shooting through the gap. And instead, that's what allowed, second level runs consistently. But then you see from the back end, I was impressed more so with the secondary than the defensive line or the linebackers. You see Taylor Hawkins come up and make some plays. And even on some plays where he doesn't make plays, you see where maybe another player might have made a negative play that impacts his opportunity to make that play. I thought it was good film. And I agree with you. I probably don't watch as much college film as you, although I try to for my draft analysis. Thought he was going to be an intriguing guy to play in the safety. I thought him and Quantrez Knight, in that nickel safety type of role that the 49ers like to use with that third safety of theirs, I thought that they could fit in that role. And George Odom's the guy who, he's the guy who you might think about. It truly depends on how well Hawkins can play as a special teamer, because Odom, that's where his bread and butter is. And I think the 49ers really value special teams, especially these past few years after the hiring of Brian Schneider. And so I think that Odom still has a spot on this roster, but depending on his health, would not be surprised to see Hawkins make the 53 after the initial cut down, or if Odom, if it remains as is, Hawkins should be an early favorite to make the roster in 2024 for sure.
Yeah, he's just a good player. He's a kid from Palm Springs, went to Palm Springs High, and was a very decorated player at San Diego State. He was 2021. He was the All Mountain West second team player. He's just a really instinctive player, and he sees it and he doesn't hesitate. So, he was a 4-year letter winner at Palm Springs High and down in Palm Springs. Just a really, really good player. And I just thought last year he was kind of at the wrong weight. And this year he just looked faster, and now he knows the defense better. He's playing fast. He's playing physical. Steve Wilkes said he's one of his favorite this week.
Another guy in the secondary who had a good week and really started to make some steam, Ambry Thomas. What have you seen from him this offseason? Are you buying into the hype? What's kind of your take on him?
Well, it's funny. I asked him after practice. I said, "Hey, you had a great first year. You didn't have a good second year, and can you describe how it went for you?" And he just said, that he got into a good groove in that rookie year, and then going into that second year, he kind of felt like everything was being handed to him, and he didn't work as hard as he should have worked, and he just basically said that he's got a new frame of mind this year. That you got a new defense coordinator, everybody's got a kind of a fresh start, and he knows that there's opportunity there. He mentioned how in the offseason he trained with Mooney Ward, and Ambry's in some ways he's kind of the prototype. I mean, he's a 6 foot, 195-pound corner with a lot of speed and a lot of athleticism, and I just think that it's like he got off to a bad start last year and he just never really recover. But I mean, I don't see the 49ers cutting him. I mean, when you have legitimate talent, NFL teams don't cut solid NFL caliber cover corners, and that's what he is. So he's got a chance to start outside. I think he'll probably wind up sharing that outside spot with Womack, but I think the presence of both of them out there will enable Diamador Lenore to play inside in the slot, and that's really been the one kind of disappointment, is that Isaiah Oliver has not really looked like much, and Oliver's due to make $4 million, and the bottom line is, when you get to Pittsburgh week 1, they got good receivers, and you better be ready. And I think they're at a point now where, forget the game plan, who are the 3 best corners? And the 3 best corners, I think, are probably Demo, Lenore, and Charvarius, and then either Womack or Ambry. So I think those guys, and Jameson's climbing that chart as well. So I think you're going to see Lenore in the slot, and I think overall, if Ambry and Womack can handle those outside duties, I think they're going to be better for it. The one thing I really like about this year's team compared to last year's team is I like the cornerback depth. The old coach that I worked with in the Canadian League used to say, "Hey, you know what the key to pass coverage is?" And I'm like, "What?" And he's like, "Pass coverage." In other words, you got to have dudes. You got to have guys. I mean, there is no key to pass coverage. You got to have guys who can play, who can mirror athletic players up and down the field. Well, look at the Niners. They got Mooney. They got Darrell Luter, who's on the PUP list, but he's a baller. You got Ambry. You got Jameson. Those are 4 right there. You got Lenore. That's 5. Womack, 6th. Then you got Quantrez Knight, 7. Isaiah Oliver, 8. So, I mean, you're probably only going to keep 7 or maybe 6. So, I mean, they got some good. They got some good competition there, and it's going to be interesting. I kind of think Quantrez is going to play a significant role on this team this year. I don't think people are banking on him either, but he was a terrific player at UCLA. He was kind of the alpha in their secondary, and he's just a real physical player, but he knows how to cover, and he's versatile. He can play a bunch of different spots. He can play the slot. He can play free safety. He can come up and hit you. He can play corner on the outside if you need him there. So I really like Quantrez quite a bit. I think he's a guy who, has in many of these practices, he stands out. He really stands out, and he's a great athlete. He's a kid from Florida. Went to East Gadsden High School, and he's just smart guy. Was on the academic honor roll. He's smart. He's got a great personality, but he's also a really good football player. He's very physical. So his dad Tommy is a supporter of his through my channel. I see Tommy in the chat, and I think Tommy's boy is going to have a great year. I think Quantrez is a hell of a player, man. I really do.
And I mean, I like a lot what you said. I mean, this corner depth was a question of mine going into the offseason, not because I didn't trust the talent, but I was wondering how quickly can the development occur with some of these guys? Because it is a younger room. And Ambry Thomas was a guy who I thought would be on the outside looking in, way back in the offseason. Well, it seems like he's starting to, come back into his own self, back into that maybe rookie year type of self. And I've definitely liked what I've seen out of Womack. I think he looks bigger for sure this year. And I think that he looks the part of an NFL cornerback. And the one thing that I'll say that I kind of read wrong was the value of Steve Wilkes and the impact he'll have on this defense. I think that with Steve Wilkes, these cornerbacks become more valuable than before. One, because they fit the mold of that press man corner that Wilkes likes to run with his defense. And this isn't just a new Wilkes thing, because Wilkes has been in the collegiate and NFL levels. If you go back to those Missouri days back in 2019, when Wilkes was a defensive coordinator running a 3-3-5, that press man coverage still was an important facet of his defense. You go back to his Cleveland days in 2021, it's been there from Arizona to the college levels to Cleveland to Carolina. That's been an important asset, and it really has allowed him to blitz at a higher rate than normal defensive coordinators. And I don't think that we'll see blitzes to the rate that Wilkes has done in the past, but I do think we'll see an increase, and I think the 49ers can afford it because of the way that Wilkes is, the scheme works into the mold of what the 49ers have at corner. Because Ambry Thomas is a press man corner. And at times, last year, if you have a press man on one side and then an off boundary on another side, if Thomas is the second corner and he's playing on the off boundary side, well, that's not playing to his skill set as well. And so I think that, Thomas, I think the role has helped him this year. Lenore obviously works well with press man. He's not necessarily the fastest corner, but his press man skills with his ability to be physical near the line of scrimmage and not necessarily let up at the line of scrimmage helps him in coverage. And then obviously Charvarius Ward has been a press man corner throughout his career, dating back also to Kansas City under Spags. And so I think that the room itself, Luter, that's a guy who Wilkes probably wanted in the draft. That's a guy who they definitely targeted, and I think he's a good pick as well. I think that this room meshes well under what Steve Wilkes wants to do with his defense. And I'm not saying that it's going to be completely different from D'Amico Ryans. I honestly think it's going to be very similar. But I think the press man mold under Steve Wilkes is going to really, truly come to fruition. And I think it's with a good group here.
Well, you can remember this too. They lost some true alphas. I mean, they lost Verrett, Dante Johnson, Jimmy Ward, Emmanuel Mosley. They lost some veteran experience on the back end. It's a younger group now. So I like the fact that Wilkes is kind of a hands-on guy. He's basically gotten in everybody's face and just said, "Hey, I challenge you to be better." And talking to a few of the guys, it's like individually, it's kind of like a mutual fund. It's like you've got all these guys are performing stocks, and if you can get them all to improve 10%, now your portfolio looks that much better. And it's the same kind of thing. I mean, if you can get Quantrez to be better and Demo to be better and Ambry to be better, and all these guys get a little bit better, and suddenly you look up and you're like, whoa, as a group, they're really good. AJ Parker's played some pretty good ball. I didn't know a lot about him, but Parker's looked good. They've got good numbers in the back end. And then you mentioned press man, tendencies. Darrell Luter at South Alabama played nothing but press man for the Jaguars. Right. He was up on the line of scrimmage rerouting guys, and I think he's a significant talent. He's currently on the PUP list, but when he gets it rolling, I think people are going to know that name. He's a big, rangy, mature, athletic, long-arm, dominating corner, and I'm eager to see what he looks like.
I agree. Before I continue on, I do want to give a shout out, first of all, to all of the people in the chat. I see all the comments and appreciate everyone for tuning in. And second, make sure if you guys aren't already subscribed to the one and only Larry Krueger, go ahead and give him a follow on Twitter. Go ahead and subscribe to his channel because he puts a lot of effort into his work. You guys can clearly see it with his analysis, and appreciate you for coming on as well.
Glad to be here, man. And, we put out a lot of videos. I mean, I would say 90% of what we do is Niners, but I also talk a little Giants baseball, a little Warrior basketball. But, putting out a lot of content, usually trying to do, 5 to 10 streams per week. And I'm trying to do at least, that many videos, if not more, every week. And this month, we actually had 1 million views of our content on our channel for the first time ever. So, thanks to all the people who support the channel and, love chopping it up with other content creators like yourself.
Appreciate it. And yeah, I mean, million views in a month. That's amazing to hear. Going forward, though, we talked about week 1. We talked about the standouts. Let's go on to week 2. Just straight up, what are you kind of looking for? What are the kind of battles you're trying to keep an eye out for? What are the storylines or different things that you're looking ahead of for tomorrow's game?
Well, first of all, I mean, I'd like to see Brock Purdy. I'd like to see Brock Purdy and Trey Lance and Sam Darnold. I think Lance is going to be better in this game. I'd like to see Purdy just get a couple series to shake off the rust. So his first, game experience is not in Pittsburgh since last year. I'd like to see more than 1 or 2 series from Darnold. Like, to me, if you could go 2 series of Purdy, the rest of the first half with Darnold, and the entire second half with Lance, or maybe the reverse. I'd love to see that. And as far as the other positions, I'm looking for the rookie tight ends, Braden Willis and Cameron Latou, to kind of show themselves. I'm looking for, the back end of the wide receiver core to compete. Chris Conley, Ronnie Bell, Tay Martin, Willie Snead. I'd love to see Danny Gray, who didn't play in the last game. I'd like to see Danny Gray get in the mix. On defense, I really would love to see Robert Beal Jr. kind of show that he's got, dynamic traits. I saw some of that in practice this week. I'd like to see Taco Charlton in the game, show me what he's got. And then at linebacker, I mean, to me, the Niners have, 3 outstanding young linebackers in Jalen Graham, D. Winters, and Marcelino McCrary Ball. And I'd like to see all those 3 guys dominate, fly around, make plays. I'd like to see all 3 of those guys make the roster, and I think it's possible. So that's what I'm looking for most. And then I'd like to see Jake Moody make a couple field goals. And if he can't, I don't want to have patience. I want to, move off of Jake Moody and go to Zane Gonzalez. And if Gonzalez can't get it done, I want to move off of Gonzalez and go to Robbie Gould. This is a team inside their Super Bowl window. They don't have time to mess around figuring out which kicker. They can't lose 2 games in September because Jake Moody's nerves or Zane Gonzalez isn't good enough. So I'd like to see a little bit more urgency on the special teams side of this thing, and get ready for Pittsburgh by getting your best kicker out there. And who cares if Jake Moody is, you think, a long-term answer and he's not ready, then put him on IR and go with Zane Gonzalez, or put him on IR and trade Zane Gonzalez and re-sign Robbie Gould. But I would not force Jake Moody to be my week 1 kicker if he continues to miss kicks in the preseason.
No, I agree. And I mean, if you're looking at, the different storylines, obviously Purdy's the big one. And I know a lot of people had a gripe with Purdy not playing last week, thinking, especially, some pointed out Mahomes, some pointed out other quarterbacks playing. Personally, I didn't care. Because to me, Purdy's real preseason was the joint practices, where he's going up against the Raiders' first team defense on, where in the game, that wasn't going to be the case. So with the joint practices there and Purdy getting as many reps as he did against the Raiders and their defense, I was fine with the way that the 49ers handled their quarterback situation last week, understanding that those joint practices are valuable and you do have to take what happens with them at face value. But this week, I do want to see Purdy play. There is no joint practices. You do want to get some in like live game reps with him, and hopefully the entirety of the first team offense for a series of 2. And that includes Trent Williams. I think it's valuable for Purdy to play with the actual unit that he's going to play with. Don't throw Jalen Moore out there. That's going to risk your quarterback, getting hurt if you're throwing in the backups with the starters. If Denver throws out their own starters, want to see Purdy play a little bit. As for the other battles, I mean, running back is going to continue to be a solid group. You're going to see a lot of carries for the backups. Receivers, the back end of that group is really talented. I think that's one of the bigger talented groups in terms of the back end. I mean, you talked about Ronnie Bell. I've also thought Chris Conley had a really solid preseason. Willie Snead's a guy who's been in this offense. He's a guy who can be, one of those trusted type of veterans. And then the tight ends, that's been the opposite. It's been a disappointing group. But you're hoping that some of those back end guys can kind of take off. And, Latu is one of them. Willis obviously is one of them. Personally, a little higher on Willis, both out of the draft and recently, but you want to kind of see some of these younger guys now really take that step forward, one game under their tails, see what they can do now in the second action.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't, to me, it's about the preseason's about, tuning yourself up for week one, staying injury free, and getting some answers to, the back end of your roster, taking inventory of your roster. So far, so good. It's not about wins. Nobody remembers who wins these games. It's not about being competitive. It's just about taking inventory, staying healthy, and fine tuning. And I think the Niners have pretty much done that. I would like to see a little bit of rhythm on offense from all three quarterbacks if they all play. And I'd like to see more continued health. I mean, the one nice thing about this summer is 49ers have gotten this far. They've had, 16, 17 days of practice, and they really have remained relatively healthy. So I think that's really the overwhelming positive.
How many rookies do you think makes the 53 if you look at it?
How many rookies? Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, maybe 9 or 10. I mean, Luter's going to wind up on the PUP.
Right.
But, I mean, I would have Ronnie Bell, Ilm Manning, Braden Willis, Robert Beal, D. Winters, Jalen Graham, Luter, unless he's on the pup, Jameson, Jair Brown, and Moody.
Got it. I think mine could be a little shorter. While Luter obviously being on pup, I think Beal could be a potential practice squad. They could also try and put him on IR to start the year. We'll see how that goes. But it depends on how well they think he's ready. But I also think you can put some of the defensive ends on the practice squad as well. The veterans, Austin Bryant, or some of those guys who you feel could make a contribution early on. And keep Beal. That was my initial take on the 53. And the one other guy is Ilm Manning. Don't know if 49ers think, well, he's undersized. We can probably put him on the practice squad, get away with it, just like they do with Jason Poe, although it's a little bit of a different setting, and try and get away with him. But that's another good case.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that every guy that I have on that team are guys that I think that wouldn't get through to the practice squad. I mean, I'm just saying, based on what I've seen, like Ilm Manning is in my opinion, the second best backup lineman they have. And then there's some other guys that I haven't really, I didn't mention Cameron Latou. I could see him being put on IR just because he's in a bad spot right now where he's dropping the ball, but he's a more talented player than this. And I just think he needs head spinning with all the there's just a lot that goes into playing tight end in this offense. And I just think his head is spinning. And because of it, he's not concentrating on the basics, which is catch the football. And so I think he's a whole lot better than what he's demonstrated thus far. A couple other guys that have kind of flashed to me that I really like. I really like Isaiah Winstead. Now, he doesn't separate. But he's a big, strong receiver who caught 90 balls for ECU last year. And there's some things that I really like about Winstead. Kalen Laburn, I really like him a lot, but I think he's probably going to the practice squad. Jack Coletto, I think, is maybe their future starter at fullback. But I think he might be either a trade candidate or maybe he can sneak through to the practice squad. Wagee, I think, gets through to the practice squad. So yeah, I mean, there's some guys there that there's a couple other rookies I could see on the practice squad in addition to those that I named.
No, definitely. Last one though for you, and it's a tough one. But who are those guys on the bubble right now that you're looking at for week 2, trying to see can they really improve their stock? Who do you kind of think is in that position at the moment?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of guys on the bubble. I mean, I would say, at tight end, Charlie Warner, Ross Dwelly, Cameron Latou, Fumagalli. I mean, I think Willis is going to be there. Kittle's going to be there, but those other guys may be battling for one spot. I think that's a spot to watch. As far as other guys in the bubble, I think at linebacker, I think they're going to keep at least 5, maybe 6, Warner and Greenlaw. And then McCrary, Ball, and Winters and Graham, the 2 rookies. But what does that mean? That means that Curtis Robinson, Flanagan Fowles, Oren Burks, I think these guys could all be battling for one spot. I think that's going to be a very competitive situation. And then at safety, or in nickelback, I should say, if Isaiah Oliver has another bad game, I mean, he's on the bubble. He's on the bubble right now. I mean, it's just, you've got other guys. They can play A.J. Parker there. They can play Quantrez Knight there. They can play Demo Lenore there. They can play Jashawn Jameson there. They've got other guys they can go with. And so I would say Isaiah Oliver is very much on the bubble.
Yeah, I actually agree. And this was going to be my next question. Because I honestly think there is a chance, despite his 2.2-year, $6.8 million contract, that Isaiah Oliver gets cut. What do you think about that?
Oh, I think it's very likely. I mean, not very likely, but very possible. He didn't play well in the Raider game. They gave him a $4 million. Is it $4 million guarantee, something like that? Or I forget exactly what the guarantee.
Guarantee at signing, I know, is 2.9. It might have been 4 in total.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that he's coming off his best year, and but they've got other options. And you got to remember this: it's like this is also the Trey Lance debate. Is that, do you keep Trey Lance if he loses out to Sam Darnold as a $9 million third-string quarterback? Most people would say yes, but then when you look ahead down the road to the 49ers 2020 cap situation, yeah, there's all kinds of ways they can deal with it between now and then, but I think they'd like to roll over some of their cap savings this year to next year so they can retain a lot of their guys. And anybody who makes money, who is battling somebody who doesn't make money, I think could be in a tough spot. For example, let's go through some of those. I think Juwan Jennings, as much as I think Jennings is a good player and a key player for them, he's probably he's a restricted free agent at the end of the year. They're probably not going to bring him back. I would say that there's a very good likelihood that, if it's close between him and Chris Conley, Ronnie Bell, Tay Martin, they may go for Conley, Bell, or Martin over Juwan, especially if a team like Tennessee comes calling, offering a 5th or 6th round pick after losing Treylon Burks. I mean, Juwan Jennings is a celebrity in the state of Tennessee. So that's one that I think is interesting. Obviously, Lance. Are they going to keep a $9 million third-string quarterback when the going rate for third-string quarterbacks is $1 million and they've got Brandon Allen already sitting there signed to $1 million contract? So, I mean, I think one of the things that we'd be naive if we didn't include the fact that there's a possibility of a Trey Lance trade between now and cut-down day. And then, on the other side of the ball, I mean, you got to look at Isaiah Oliver. I mean, Quantrez Knight and these young DBs they have are cheaper than Isaiah Oliver. So if it's an even deal, Quantrez may beat them out, and the Niners could have some cap savings there. So anybody who's and then Oren Burks, Oren Burks makes $4.5 million, and the Niners could save some money on the cap by going with Graham and Winters and Marcelino and Curtis Robinson, let's say, or Flanagan Fowles over Oren Burks. And I think Oren Burks might fetch a day 3 pick in a trade. So, to me, I think there's one thing that's really clear. Niners have a really deep roster. They've got some players that are better than the kind of players that you would typically cut, but they may not make the roster. So, what does that mean? I think there's going to be a number of small trades between now and the cut down. And if I had to put my, over-under prediction on it, I'll predict there'll be, 2.5 trades as the over-under number, and I'd go over. I think there's going to be a few moves that net the 49ers day 3 picks or more.
And I think that's a good case. In my first 53-man roster prediction, which was, I believe, 2 weeks ago now, I had 2 trades in there, and one was a running back, Elijah Mitchell, and the other was a linebacker. At the moment, I don't think Elijah Mitchell gets traded compared to as I initially thought. I think they are comfortable keeping those 4 really talented running backs and then Laybourne on the practice squad. At least it seems like it after signing McNichols and then kind of hiding Laybourne in a way from preseason action. But I genuinely do think a linebacker, especially if they believe Warren Burks, they don't want to roster that type of cap hit, he could be a trade candidate. Curtis Robinson, DFF with a strong preseason. that's not necessarily been there so far. They could be trade candidates. Isaiah Oliver, if a team needs a starting nickel corner, could be a potential trade candidate despite being signed this offseason. I think that there are a lot of definitely potential trade candidates, and that comes with a team that
Zane
oh
Gonzalez.
Zane definitely. I mean,
I mean,
very
Zane's
similar
been good.
deal.
Zane's been
Yeah.
good. Like if you watch Zane, I'd be totally comfortable based on what I've seen in practice going with Zane Gonzalez as the number one kicker. So what does that mean? That means that Zane probably could be the number one kicker on a half dozen teams in the league right now. I think it's that was a very nice trade. I think the 49ers might be able to get a 7th round pick for Zane Gonzalez, at the end of the month here when they cut this thing down.
And he kicked 91% of his kicks back in 2021 before the injury with Carolina in 22. He has some value. We'll see if they're able to recoup some of that value. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. I mean, and so they're in an interesting spot, and I just think that people should have kind of an open mind about the cut down. You also got to remember this, everything in the NFL, it's you sign free agents, then you have your draft, then you sign college free agents, and then everybody kind of goes and works out and figures out. Well, guess what happens? There's some positions where you drafted a guy, you signed a free agent, and both those guys that you added don't do anything, and you still have a need. And then there's other situations where you sign a free agent and he fills the need, and then you followed it up with a couple picks in the draft, and now you got a surplus. So it's just there are teams. The Niners have a surplus of linebackers. They've got a surplus of receivers. They've got a surplus of running backs. They've got a couple areas with surplus of kickers, surplus of quarterbacks, and yet they could use a third tackle, and they could really use some defensive end help, and so they may be able to find a match in a trade with some other team that has a surplus at their positions of need.
Yeah, I do agree. And I mean, when we talked earlier, we talked about how the 49ers don't have as much depth at certain positions, but they do have an abundance at others. And that will certainly come handy come, that August 30th cutdown date. And I think it's also a lot more chaotic this year compared to past years because you now just go from 90 to 53. It all happens at once rather than the gradual cut down period where teams kind of have at least a solid sense of their finalized roster by the end of that cut down date. It all happens at once now. And I think that will provide more chaos, not only in the waiver market, but also in the trade market as well.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point.
But Larry, that is all I have for you today. I appreciate all your insight and thank you for coming on the show. Any last comments before we head on out of here today?
Well, no, I'm just going to say, hey, congratulations on the channel and the things that you're doing, and keep it rolling, man. It's inspiring, and I love reading your stuff on 49er Web Zone. I would encourage everybody to do the same. I've got Niners Nation and 49er Web Zone kind of bookmarked on my phone, and I go to camp every practice, and I sit there. I get there, sometimes an hour and a half early, and I'll, on my to-do list is to kind of hit 49er Web Zone, hit Niners Nation, Google 49ers, see what stories are out there, search Twitter. And a lot of times, you give me ideas with different articles you're writing. So keep up the great work, man.
Hey, I really appreciate that. It means a lot. And really good stuff as well with your channel. It's been great to see the growth there. And obviously you're doing really well for yourself now. Larry, as always, I appreciate you. Those in the chat, thank you guys so much for your comments, for your discourse, and for your support. We'll be back soon. Game tomorrow. I will be there. And then we'll be back on Sunday with the show. Until then, see you next time.